This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Ann Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders, and thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Ann Pratt, formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Leadership Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our bold leader joins us today from Africa. She has transitioned from a childhood in small mining towns in the semi-rural heartland of South Africa into international corporate boardrooms and is the recipient of multiple awards. Some of these awards include Africa's Top 20 Rising Stars, the Positive Role Model Award, and Trailblazer Award, presented at Africa's Gender Mainstreaming Awards. She is a qualified chartered accountant, super smart with the numbers, and is the former group executive and chief financial officer for Standard Chartered Bank Africa, overseeing 15 countries, 4 listed entities, and global finance management groups. She is also the former head of finance for Barclays Bank, Africa, Middle East, and the Indian Ocean Islands, and has served as an independent, non-executive director for numerous boards in South Africa, Africa, and internationally. You won't want to miss this insightful conversation as we explore with her how a chartered accountant and high reputation financial executive developed head, heart, and soul, while making individual choices and ensuring that they are authentically aligned in life, in career, and leadership is crucial to evoke the best version of ourselves. We also explore some of her business successes and wins in the world of banking and technology, and what it means to her to share a birthday with Nelson Mandela. We warmly welcome Jo-Ann Pöhl, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Jo, thank you so much for joining us today from South Africa. It's always lovely to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Anne. Good to be here.
You've had a wonderful career. You've also had a very inspiring life. Having known you over some time, I was wondering, what is there in your personal life? Can you take us back to a moment in time where you've had a really big personal challenge? What was it? What was a moment that you discovered something new about yourself, and how did you pivot out of that?
Big question, and I think definitely encompassed in a moment. So thank you. I think I've found that my life relationships are all journeys that we travel, and they definitely shape who we are and who we become over time. And the best example I can give you is my personal experience from a terminal illness perspective, or what is considered potentially terminal illnesses. And so I was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm generally used to the one that offers help, gives help, pulls things together versus actually being helped in the process. And so I think for me, that specific moment in time was quite surreal. I had family, I had deadlines, I had a career, I had a legacy to build, to leave. It was not, I think, part of my plan, suffice it to say, nor did it fit into what I was focusing on. And in fact, the question is, what was life after cancer going to be like? Never what would it be through cancer. So I think I lived in denial for a little bit, a bit like, if I think leadership, it's like steering a ship in stormy waters with your eyes closed, to be frank. I'm hoping for the best, then properly angry when you hit an iceberg or rocks or it doesn't go your way. And for me, it was not reality. It also was not a character building approach to the situation. Life throws its curveballs all the time, whether it's on a personal level, in the businesses we serve, and facing our humanness and my humanness specifically and fears head on wasn't easy. I had to discover that actually it was only possible if I didn't face it alone. And that in and of itself was a massive learning piece. A very good friend sat me down and what she said has resonated with me forever. She said, everyone needs to feel needed. And that's literally been key in my personal and in my professional life. The same friend, bless her soul, bought me my sister's keeper, which was a cathartic experience and a proper good cry. But I think that the life, what it did for me is that I recognized the value in people in our lives, that allowing them to come in to the things that matter most or affect us the most is key. It makes them closer. It makes followership easier, actually. And during our toughest times, whether it's business or whether it's personally or just for ourselves, we're only as strong, I think, as the people we can lean on and those who lean on us. So that for me was a really, really good lesson. It shaped who I am. I think I remembered the tough times as well as the funny ones. And I can share some of those if you'd like. But those, I think my father bought me alphabet soup so that I could throw up in sentences because I was an A type and wanted to do things extremely well. I remember climbing out of my car once I'd parked it and my wig was stuck in the door and I didn't realize I had no hair on until someone chased me down and said, "You're hairless." But I laugh about those now. But at the time, showing up as myself, the reality of where I was at, took quite a bit of acceptance, specifically around what I could control and what I couldn't control in the process. So I learned a few things. One, that my life may be finite. Well, it definitely is finite. That life in general is an infinite game, as Simon Sinek always says, and it will continue with or would continue with or without me. And I think at that point in time, the reality that our choices matter, it's the one thing we do have in terms of how we play, who we play with, how we show up, I think is really important. And I learned that specifically maybe 4 things came out of that. No man or woman is an island. Closer to home, the African proverb rings true. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And for me, that meant if I wanted to keep going, go together. That a woman, mother, leader recognizes her family, her inner circle as a collective success. I mean, I don't think the human race would be where it is if we didn't operate as a collective. If you think about just at the beginning of time, the dangers out there around being hunted or being the hunter in the process. And then I suppose the biggest lesson I learned was vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. And the quote maybe to take away from Brene Brown when I was in remission that has always stuck with me is that it's vital that we put our finger on the places, the people, the events, the commitments, and the emotions that scare us the most. Facing those things with an open heart, I think an open mind is central to our growth as human beings. It was central to literally, in my case, not dying. You don't get to choose to live or die. You just get to choose how you live in every sphere of your life.
Of course. And first of all, Jo, congratulations. I mean, that's a remarkable feat. And, being a cancer survivor myself, I have a little bit of understanding in terms of some of that journey. But, when was that? How long ago was that? And how has that shifted how you've elected and, to live your life since then and some of the choices you've made since then?
Firstly, it's a privilege to talk to you on your journey. I think they're all personal, but to you, congratulations to you. And a great set of hair, by the way. My hair's never come back in the spaces. So in my case, it is in 2003. So I've been in remission, for a long time now. 2007, sorry, I've been in remission for a long time, more than 10 years. I've had a number of times I've gone back with real scares. And you do have other side effects that come through, like any decision you make in life or any process you work through healing on. There are always consequences, so to speak, or side effects that you continue to live with in the process. And I think what it taught me was to talk the talk and walk the talk. And the reason I say that is that my mindset had shifted. One, I was at work regularly, and I suppose if you've got flu, it's quite difficult to be off ill if your boss is there after chemo. And I learned that I had to explain that it was the one thing I could control. So showing up was a choice. But I needed to give permission, to my team for the choice to also look after themselves and be out of the office. And that meant different things for different people. The other piece was my shift from perfection to progress. And I think I'd very much grown up with around excellence is what matters the most. And now it was about literally failing forward. You can't determine the outcome of your reaction to treatment. You can't necessarily determine where you can and can't, go, because there are various restrictions around how you react during your journey from a physical perspective. And there's also your mental well-being across the space. So I think keep on learning as I go was important. And as a consequence, the two quotes that properly resonated with me, because I had to recalibrate and reboot myself a few times, and I've had to over the years for various reasons linked specifically, to my cancer journey, is in times of change, I think learners inherit the earth while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And that's Eric Hoffer. And I think I was very equipped to deal with a world that was normal, controlled, and going according to plan. So this properly taught me what agility meant in the spaces, and that it was all about Alvin Toffler's, learn, unlearn, relearn. And I had to keep doing that, and not just about what, defined me as a qualification or as a person or as a career, but really individually who I was. Often in a crisis, we look outwards, and this forced me actually to go inwards to find out where my strength actually lies, what was at my core, and as a consequence, lean on that to move forward together with the people around me. They were interesting times indeed.
So when you went inwards, what was the big discovery inwards?
For a lot of my life, validation came through accolades. Validation came through delivering on the big projects. Validation, came from those around you. And that actually spending time inwards was about understanding not necessarily what makes you happy or content, but what satisfies us, what makes me feel fulfilled, being very deliberate about lining up my purpose with what I did every day and not waiting for when I could do that. I think you always think that you have lots of time to make a difference. And so from a personal perspective, balancing what got me going intellectually with what got me going emotionally, with what kept me going physically was important. And I think I steered very clearly away from work-life balance, but rather work-life choice. I was very deliberately going to be where I was needed, where I felt I should be. And as a consequence, I became very aware of what made me tick. But it was not by default. And for a lot of my journey, I think because I put my hand up, I worked hard, I had my head down, the route almost came about by default. This became a very deliberate juncture in my career, and underpins the fact that actually doing what is essentially right, my ethics, my integrity, all of the pieces that you could never get back if you slip in any moment are very crucial. And that then framed who I worked with after that, who I worked for, and what I did. I think it's why I am where I am today.
Yeah, that's powerful, Jo. And do you have a purpose statement? Could you share that with us?
Actually, I grew up with it. It's never lose your all for life. And the reason I say that is with it comes innate curiosity you must keep fueling, a sense of wonder around what's happening around you and for the people around you too. And the fact that actually you choose to live in the moment, or has that sense of breathe, take it all in, and then move forward. And so as a consequence, when actually what you're doing doesn't sometimes take your breath away, it doesn't tie up with your purpose.
And what shaped that, going back?
I suppose in terms of what shaped that specific mantra, I remember there's a big gap between my younger sister and I. I'm over a decade in that space. And I remember we lived in a very small town in South Africa when we traveled to the big city. And part of that trip to the big city was to go and watch airplanes take off, which for us as, young children really was fascinating. I hadn't been on an airplane or didn't go on an airplane till I'd finished school. And I remember going to a funeral actually and being really, some complex reactions between being so excited and so sad at the same time, which is really how life happens, right? Both of those emotions run quite high or run quite deep. And I looked at my sister, rolled my eyes as any teenager would and said, oh no, here we go again. And was pulled aside by my father and my mother, who looked at her and looked at me and said, watch her face. And I remember that look of sheer wonder around the never lose your all for life. And that has stuck with me forever. Because
your sister's face.
My sister's face. Because whoever you're working with or the team or the project you're working on or the customers you are facing. It's that sense of user experience, almost how they experience the moment, that is so crucial to listening with all that you are, your head, your heart, and your gut, to see, what is it that gets people excited? What is it that keeps them fully present, especially in this day and age where we suffer from constant partial attention? And I think remembering that sense of, specifically, I was in banking in Africa, we were doing a lot of things for the first time, is that first time sense of why it matters so much to someone, or the impact it has on their life, or the moment in time that will then be a priceless memory. I think that has stuck at me and has always struck a chord within me.
That's great. And what town was it that you grew up in?
Oh, I grew up in many towns. My dad's a miner, so I grew up in a little town called Fochville, in a town called Carletonville, in a bigger town called Rustenburg, and as a consequence, Western area as well. So I have the ability and the resilience to make friends quite quickly, but more importantly, to take relationships with me. So that actually was quite key. But with that came a sense of working out where you belong. And I suppose I've discovered over time that home is where your heart is. And that's your heart for your role in your workplace, your heart for your people, and then the heart in my home.
Of course. And the town when you were going with your sister to the airport, which town was your family based in at the time?
We were in Fochville at the time.
Okay.
It has its origins in French, but very interesting when people try and say it outside of that.
Yeah, of course. But you talk about how you kind of take these philosophies through into the workplace, Jo. You've had a remarkably successful career. Can you share with us one of those big wins in your career? What really stands out?
Maybe if I'm cheeky, I can share two highlights. One,
but take us back to a moment in time.
In time. Okay.
Yeah.
So Standard Chartered Bank 2011, 2012, 2013. So really working on the African continent. I think the bank itself was a merger of the Standard Bank of British South Africa and Chartered Bank of India, Australia and China. So felt almost attracted to it, the fact that it had its same roots as I did in South Africa, and then had divested from the country in the 80s, and then came back in 1992 as a rep office. And so moving there was quite deliberate around the belief when I did join them in 2000s, because I had gone through the first democratic election and wanted to understand why people were in South Africa by choice or why they came back. And so it was a privilege to be part of an organization that really was enthusiastic about the continent, about my home country, the potential we had, being innovative around products, around people. And I genuinely believe that banking can actually enable, it should grow, well, in good years, generally twice GDP, but it is what helps us actually build economies. If you think about a simple carrot farmer that starts on a subsistence basis and eventually is funded, whether it's his vehicle asset finance or his crop in terms of inputs, and you've got transactional banking, or you've got any kind of letters of credit, you really facilitate, you're a market maker. And that for me was fantastic. So as part of the team that helped with legislation, putting together things like vehicle asset finance, where you have your banking fraternity, your legal fraternity, your government, and your private sector working together as enabling factors. We had first ever digital branches in Kenya and in Ghana, and very much committed to being part of the continent's future. So, a trader in secondary markets, so actively deepening local capital markets. It made a difference. It made a difference to the continent. It made a difference to how banking is perceived, and the level of inclusivity should change and shape lives forever. So that is core. Even where I am now, we work with banking platforms that allow that level of inclusivity through various technologies to really reach more people than they would have in the past. So that's always been a calling. And I cannot not mention the second one, which is recently, really, we've gone to market with our results, but the EOH turnaround journey.
Just share the EOH turnaround, yeah.
And the reason being is our purpose, very deliberately, is to solve. And I love the last three components there: courageously, exponentially, and together, which talks very much to my underpinning pieces around, as a collective, we do more and we do the right thing. And so that piece around a turnaround from 1.3 billion loss in the previous year to, just 147 million in profit is demonstrative of the fact that doing the right thing pays off, staying in the course pays off. And we've got unmatched capabilities across many aspects of the economy and international footprint, which then again talks to my piece around, the EMEA region and Africa at the heart of that. So also there was more opportunity from a people's perspective. So upskilling people, reskilling people, making sure the environment was one that was conducive to change and innovation. And conscious capitalism is about choosing who you do business with, making sure what we do is sustainable, and that actually we recruit on that basis too. So transparency in our numbers, etc. So for me, it's been a rewarding journey to be part of a team that was focused on doing what matters most, and staying the course through what has not been the easiest of journeys, but definitely from a highlight perspective, one of the most rewarding I've had across my career.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Jo. And in terms of the EOH story, I mean, if you can just share, the core business and the core mission of the business, just to give us that clarity.
Yes. So I think from an EOH perspective, we've got a number of businesses, just to give everyone a view of what we look like. Our strategy pillars cover our IOCO, that offers really good growth potential. I come out of the IOCO fold, so to speak, 63% of our business. And there we look at our ICT construct. We represent a number of OEMs and 500 partnership certifications. So our original equipment manufacturer relationships are really important and world-class. And we've actually got a go-to-market strategy tailored specifically to our clients' needs. So that has been quite key. We also have Nextech, which looks at infrastructure and people solutions, the international footprint that I talked about, and more recently, we've also got Rocket Lab Ventures. So I think those pillars are quite key. We operate in a very highly competitive market. And so maybe, I suppose, our differentiating factors is our large and diverse client base, very well-established relationships, and importantly, our track record is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you think about it, I mean, you talk about collective, effort and conscious capitalism. What are the three big things, Jo, that kind of keep you, concerned about the leadership challenges facing the world today? What would be the three big things that really stand out, that if we talk about current and aspiring leaders that need to lead boldly into the future, what are the big challenges that, we need to take on? I know you work for the IOCO portion of EOH. Can you just help unpack a little more about what IOCO is and the core mission and focus in terms of that part of the organization?
So I think let's start with our name, IOCO. So it was inspired by a digitally native internet organization. So that's the IO, and creative organizations, that's the CO of the future. So in essence, it's the coming together of a community of great people with the best technology that serves humanity. So in a world where we're rapidly changing technologies or altering the course of what we do, innovation in everything we do towards a sustainable end is quite key. And so we offer the full scope of services in the value chain for ICT. And as a consequence, we're a key player in information, communications, technology.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's excellent. And, what do you think, you speak about positioning organizations for the future. What do you think the big challenges are? What concerns you as a leader going forward?
So I think there are four things that concern me as a leader and as a human being. Is climate change. I think we're starting to see the effects already of extreme weather conditions. We have habitats permanently altered, seasonality changing, which impacts a lot of what it is we do. And here specifically, if you even look at the sector around farming, there's an impact on that. Then extreme inequality. Still global inequality remains a major challenge. That's economic and financial exclusion, that's race, that's gender, poverty as a result of some of those pieces. And I think we continue to see an erosion of social cohesion. We see polarized political activity, unfortunately, potentially some destabilization. Earlier this year, we had riots even here and then violence over time. I think coupled with that inequality is the digital divide that's getting wider, and our responsibility in terms of how to close that gap, because it's definitely an inequality multiplier. So that piece does worry me, so to speak, around how we need to focus going forward. And then the discrimination. We've talked about that earlier around race, gender, classism, sexual orientation, ageism, nationality, belonging. All of those pieces still remain top of mind, with diversity, equity, and inclusion still celebrated as opposed to part of our DNA everywhere in terms of how we operate better with each other. And I think overall our well-being, I think more and more being mentally well, physically well, being from a health perspective, able as leaders to actually be grounded so that you can ground and lead others. And as people, understanding what good stress is versus stress that really is difficult to work with is important. So I think from my perspective, those challenges are something we have to deal with. We have a holistic world. No longer can we box work and home and play. They are much more integrated. We've seen that our ecosystems are more connected through the pandemic. And as a consequence, our ability to survive is linked to each other, as is our ability to navigate any storm that we have to weather or any race one event. Sometimes they think we should know enough to anticipate some of these things are bound to happen. And then also to get to a point where we can thrive, albeit differently.
Of course. And, you touched on quite an important point. I mean, in fact, even earlier in the conversation around your mental well-being and state of mind and dealing with the adversity of cancer and coming through that journey, what do you think the mindset is that helps people stand up and work through these difficult times, the difficult conversations, a sense of, is there a bright and hopeful future? What is that mental mindset? How have you been able to navigate that in your own life and develop that?
So I think curiosity is important. Curiosity fuels hope, and then with hope comes optimism. And the reason I say that is curiosity and the willingness to, as I mentioned earlier, learn, unlearn, relearn, allows you to look at options. And so when we're starting to look at optionality, all of a sudden what you're trying to solve or what you're working through isn't finite. It doesn't have an end state. It has an iterative process. And I think that genuine curiosity and how to solve forward is important versus sometimes just unpacking how we got here. So I think that's been quite key. I think a very deep sense of accountability and responsibility. When I say that, being an extreme owner of my role, the business I'm in, the people I work with, myself. And I think as a consequence, asking that question of who am I is important. And why am I here is important around the purpose. And then probably the key question that has carried me the longest in the journey is how can I help? Which is a very different perspective around being outside of the situation and the problem. It is about making a difference in a broader space. We tend to live in bubbles, and in difficult circumstances, we almost make the walls on those bubbles a little bit thicker. But when you ask, how can I help? You have to look up and look beyond that. So I think that's been key. I've been very deliberate about my triple Ds. So what I can delay, what I don't have to do, and what I can delegate. And I'd say that in an empowering way, because as a leader or as a family member, being in a position where actually they can continue without you is the most difficult situation to work towards. And my cancer journey, my journey in the organizations I've had the privilege to work with, has been all about that. It's been about enabling the generation that will come way after me, as opposed to enabling just myself.
So you're saying that, that resonates with you. I mean, you're right. It does talk to the future of leadership. And what do you think that looks like?
So I suppose a couple of more creative words to some degree. One, I think we are artists because we are part of creating the future, and truly meaningful art has a lasting impression. And to do that, it has to have the right balance. And I think in our scenario, leaders have to balance technology and humanity. And it's going to be an and versus an all world. And so that for me is quite key. Being an absolute master communicator. So not just a narrator of the story, I think is key. Listening to understand. So not just hearing what people are saying, but actually being fully present in terms of their verbal and nonverbal cues. A lot of what we actually take in is nonverbal. They say between 70 and 93%, depending on the person. And I think so those two skills, listening and communication, are timeless leadership skills, whether they are skills at home, at work, on the sports field, even or in play. We've often talked about servant leadership. I think that still remains important. Practicing humility. I think Nelson Mandela is the epitome of that. And it goes a long way, whether it's with your peers, your leaders, your customers, your team, yourself, even around, being kind in the spaces. I think being an explorer is important. I talked earlier about curiosity, the willingness to try new things, and creating a culture that focuses on learning versus a fear of failure. I think South Africa has come a long way, but we have a long way to go. We want to get it right and get it right first time. A number of our mottos or our country mandate, company mantras are linked to that, versus actually it's about a yes and versus a no but, and being open to opportunities and being able to collaborate, to think through things differently. So I think being, focused on what matters, but less fear of failure, and more about moving forward or failing forward, I think is important. So artist, explorer, master communicator, servant, future and tech savvy is not negotiable when we're talking about the future of leadership, but being on top of trends, connected to our networks, understanding not just the market we serve or the environment we're working, but thinking beyond, I think, what's on the horizon. So being a true strategist around what will unfold in the market versus what is there today, because often you need to cannibalize some of your own spaces to remain relevant. And so tech savvy is one thing, and digitally fluid is almost not negotiable. But then the last thing I think is being a global citizen. We are wired for connection. I think the pandemic has taught us that even more than ever in terms of how connected we are. And so the potential to have employees all over the world, customers all over the world, global citizen means that we have to think globally. We have to embrace diversity. Yes, act locally in those spaces, but foster a culture of demonstrable inclusion, appreciate diverse teams, understand what that unlocks. And it is one thing about being invited to the dance, but another thing being asked to actually dance. And I think as global citizens, as leaders, that diversity and culture piece from an inclusivity perspective, an equitable perspective, needs to permeate from a emergent theory, ground roots, centrally and top down. And I think being very conscious of how we act and making sure someone that stands outside the circle is brought into the circle, and taking people with you as a leader versus them just following behind you.
Of course. No, that's powerful stuff, Jo. You alluded to Nelson Mandela, and I know you've had many moments to kind of, be part of the Mandela story in South Africa in terms of how it affected all of us as citizens, and not only in South Africa, but in the world. Can you share with us a specific Mandela moment, a moment that stands out in terms of how he touched a chord, lit a fire?
So I think the one thing is the elections in 1994. I just missed being old enough to vote, so my birthday came after that. But just the Nelson Mandela's choice of where to vote. So he voted as a high school in Durban. He voted then where the Zulu nation really are dominant, and he is Xhosa by nature. So that absolutely deliberate act of where he chose to cast his first vote in an epic election that saw the first election where all South Africans could vote, I think was incredible. He demonstrated what inclusion would feel like. And that was a life-changing moment in my history and South Africans' history overall. I'm blessed to share a birthday with him. So reminded every year, I think, of what a gift his life was. And he fought for many of the values that I hold very dear, that talks to, women empowerment, access, importantly, to quality education. He fought for our future, which is what we're talking about today, our children, and for humanity, and with humility across the board. So I think that initial single act has struck me always, that he recognized, the Nationalist Party when he took over. He has always shared his successes, and very deliberately, I think, he said we must use time wisely and forever realize that the time is always ripe to do right. And I think his ability to do that and demonstrate that on a regular basis, even when the decisions were not popular or difficult, I think the level of authenticity that he showed throughout his tenure from that starting point has been very key around how I see our South Africa and how we should deliver on what his vision was for us.
Yeah, for sure. And, we know how much he loved children and how much he missed them in prison. What do you think Mandela would say to the children, not only of South Africa, but of the world today?
The time is yours. This is your time. I think live your legacy, live like you mean it, because he did. Love like your life depended on it. He did that. There was a sense of him you could feel. I love the storytelling that was shared across the journey. And I think I would say keep a journal so you remember the stories you need to share. Share and be honest. Your ethics and integrity, you can never gain or get back in the process. Ground your purpose in a greater purpose. So greater than yourself, than who you are. I suppose something he possibly couldn't always do, but I think if he had more time, it would be, say, to give family the time of, the gift of time. I think he gave all of our country the gift of his time. So it's about going back to your roots, to live for others and something bigger than yourself, and to create something where they talk about your vision long after you've departed. And this is a great example of that.
Absolutely. And for our generation, Jo, I mean, if we think about some of the existential threats that you've alluded to, what would he say to our generation? And do you think his leadership is still relevant for us today?
I think his leadership is timeless. I think maybe 5 things. Start with empathy. People matter. And aside from everyone saying change is the only constant, the fact that we are human first is relevant everywhere in the world. And if you do walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you build a relationship with them and create trust that is necessary for not only sustainability, but also for success as a collective. Then I think it would be follow with passion and lead with humility. That's about buy-in. That's around rallying the troops around you, being excited about what's to come, realistic too in that bucket, and then working with everyone, your team, your people, your tribe, to realize a goal. And leading with humility means that actually you step out of the way for someone to pick up the reins when you can. So being a king and queen maker, as opposed to being the king or queen all the time. I think lead by example ties into that. So talk the talk and walk the walk.
Yeah.
And very important is to recognize people, acknowledge their work, and then work on yourself. So instead of being a finger pointer, so to speak, and saying this is what could work or could be different, is being a thumbs up person. So that's about being positive, being constructive, supporting what can gather the right kind of momentum, and starting with yourself. So what could I do differently? How could I help? And then the thumbs up around, actually, this is what you did well. Now, how do we go for better together and go forward?
No, that's great. Just a couple of fun facts that possibly not everyone knows about you. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Sure, I have so many. Probably one of my favorites is making apricot jam from the apricot trees outside, because my whole family was in the kitchen doing that, and you got to taste it, touch it, feel it. It was a sensual experience, and still to this day when I eat apricot jam, and now we call them korua broodjies, so apricot jam and cheese on toast on a good old South African braai or barbecue, it makes me think of that. I can almost touch and taste it.
That's wonderful. And what is something few people know about you?
So when I say that I get my energy from deep thinking work, and I'm very engaging, inclusive, and social, I think that actually it's that quiet time for me is a necessity. And I think people are surprised by the fact that actually that's what fuels me. I love people, I love spaces. But for me to be grounded, I need time to recalibrate, a bit like Google Maps or Waze, an opportunity for me just in my own head to have the pieces fall into place. And I do that in quiet times, and sometimes don't make enough time for it. And that's when I can be a bit frazzled. So where I get my energy from and where people may think I get my energy from is probably quite different. Plus, I ride a motorbike. I have a Harley Davidson, who had one, where we now have 4 children. So I'm going to be the safe person in the backup vehicle. But I love that. I think my helmet is there to keep my ears on, and my ears are there to make sure that when I smile so broadly, the front of my face literally doesn't flip off.
So, Jo, that's pretty revealing. If you dare to share, is there anything else people don't know about you?
what's quite difficult is to see yourself through the eyes of other people. And I say that because every now and again, or probably more often than not, suffer from imposter syndrome. Like you almost step out and go, is that me? Like, how did we get there as a collective? How did we do that? More importantly, we did do that. And in some moments, sure, that was tough, but it was worth it. And I think that sense of almost disbelief around where you are at certain times, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's in a presentation, or when you stop and reflect on your day, that's real. I almost thought over time that as you became more grounded in who you were, more self-aware, there was less of a worry about imposter syndrome or mask you might wear or might not. I think the more my purpose lines up with what I do and where I am, actually sometimes the more fearful I am of, is this real? And so as a consequence, yes, I think definitely suffer from imposter syndrome, surprised sometimes, and then as a consequence feel very, very accountable and responsible to deliver on the promises I make to myself, to others, and of leaving something behind that is much, much greater than I am. I'd like to be remembered not for my name. I'd like to have a fingerprint on a number of people's lives that they can't ever quite figure out where they got it from, but actually there's just something that you've left behind, and it is not branded you. It is branded about the organizations and the people that come along after you. And so sometimes, the reality of seeing things all fall into place surprises me in a good way.
Yeah, well, interesting how you manage that too, and interesting how, even with the passage of time and experience, so many of us are faced with that kind of challenge, about our authenticity and our value. And what is your favorite book you're reading at the moment?
I happened to be reading Viktor Frankl's Meaning of Life. And the reason for the timing is because when you talk about a moment in time, it was Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October, and Viktor Frankl, there was the Moments in Time calendar, which talked all about the meaning of life. So it is an annual tradition. It is an important space to understand that man's freedom is his freedom of choice and his attitude towards situations. And so that's a firm favorite that I read often. And then there's a beautiful set work actually that is a school set work here called Trash. And it talks about the dumps in India and what children discover, etc. And it's also just sometimes you need a book that speaks of hope from beginning to end.
Of course. Jo-Ann, our final closing comments. Any final thoughts around leadership, leading boldly into the future, Mandela's message for the world?
Yeah, I think that we are all accountable to being part of the future. I think we contribute to that. And so maybe the legacy that I think we need to leave is the opportunity for the people around us to learn, to grow, and to be their best selves. I think as leaders, if we can spot unicorns and literally free them, less about things and accolades and more about actually what the future could look like and who embodies what that looks like, is important. And that if we as leaders are empowering success, and success shared is success doubled, the snowball effect we will have in the communities we serve, the businesses we work in, the friendship circles we have, the teams we play with, will live long before our roles have ended. It would be a privilege in the business world to be a grandparent of the protégés you've seen realize their potential, much like it's a privilege to be a parent, and then even more so a grandparent when you see the full circle of life, business cycle, etc., all come to fruition.
Well, Jo, thank you so much for sharing that. You're such an inspiring woman. I think your circle of life, your amazing life, has been and is an inspiration to countless people across the continent and internationally. And, just keep shining. Congratulations on all your personal achievements and, of course, the difference you make in the world of business and work. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story and to share. I've learned a lot along the journey with you as well, and look forward to learning from so many of the stories you're going to share too. Thank you.
Thank you. Talking to my bold and dear friend, Jo Pöhl, helps us reflect upon measured vulnerability. Jo is a top-tier left-brain analytical numbers person. She is a multi-awarded businesswoman, a director of companies who has worked at local, national, regional, and international levels. She is a former chief financial officer of a large listed corporation. Jo is measured and vulnerable. It's not about letting everything hang out without giving things thoughtful consideration. Jo is calm, collected, and considered, and gives thought before responding to any difficult or challenging situation. She has a steady and regular rhythm. While vulnerable, she is unafraid to speak beyond the numbers, the strategy, and the technical aspects of business. Jo discusses her cancer diagnosis and her consequential inner journey that helped her discover new parts of herself. She openly shares these lessons of life and leadership learned, and is a corporate director with head, heart, and soul. Friends, it takes a measured vulnerability to get your people on board in any process that requires a turnaround, innovation, adaptation, or change. So what are the critical elements? Well, firstly, name your part of the mess. What is your part of the problem? Secondly, what actions are you willing to take or show that you own your part of the challenge and are willing to make difficult changes too? Thirdly, name and specify equal sacrifices in tough times, just as you ask of others. For example, if you're asking your people to take a pay cut, make sure you take at least a proportional pay cut too. Next, display your incompetence, as hard as that is, in times of reskilling and upskilling. Number 5, make the first move to foster a culture of learning. Number 6, publicly acknowledge what you do not know, or show what you are trying to learn in this process of change, which shows other people that this is new for you too. And finally, together, you will inspire others to adopt the same openness and measured vulnerability to push these frontiers of change. Nelson Mandela once said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." When you dare to share and be measured and vulnerable, what historically was strong becomes weak, and what was once perceived as weak connects us and inspires others to join this journey of transformation and change. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time, one step for you, but together with measured vulnerability, a giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog, and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.